name's Patty Mulvihill. For those of you I haven't met, I'm the Executive Director of the League of Oregon Cities, and we're here today for our weekly Friday legislative webinar. Before we start, this is probably old hat for most of you, but a few housekeeping issues. If you've not done so, please make sure that your microphone is muted, and please keep it muted the entire time unless I specifically ask you to unmute yourself. Please make sure your screen name identifies yourself and the city that you represent. When it gets to the Q&A portion of today's events, we will try and prioritize those who represent a city over somebody who might be part of the general public or a member of one of our affiliates. For today's legislative webinar, we're going to have a few things to discuss today. We've got Legislative Director Jim McCauley is going to give you a high-level overview of those issues that are priorities for us but may not be specifically focused. I'm hearing my audio's too low. All right, Kevin, why don't you take over while I figure out my microphone issue?
Nothing like live TV, right? Okay. And it's a good thing I printed a script. Okay, so here's a quick overview of what we're going to do as far as our top bills of the week.
Moving.
Linda Wise, you're not muted, so please mute yourself. Top bills of the week, we're going to be talking about transit lodging tax flexibility. Jim, I see you on screen. I assume my audio sounds good. Okay, thank you. We'll also have an update on the governor's homes bill. We'll be looking at Senate Bill 6, which is a shot clock for building permits. We'll also be talking about a bill we've looked at several times on this call, Senate Bill 916, extending unemployment benefits to striking workers. And we'll also have some good news on the recreational immunity bill. With that, quick note, because of the volume of information we're going to go through today, we will be holding all questions and answers until the end of the presentation. So if you have a question, be sure to raise your Zoom hand or put your question in the chat. I and other staff will be monitoring the chat to make sure that we're keeping track of the questions in order, and then we will address those in the Q&A portion. So I'm going to hand it off to Jim McCauley now, who's going to walk us through the bills I just mentioned.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Patty and I are fresh back from Washington, D.C. this week from the National League of Cities Congressional City Conference. I'll have a quick little update, or at least a summary of how that went this week at the end. One thing to maybe start things off, or at least the top end, to kind of give you some perspective. Check the bill numbers today, and we are at 3,344 bills that have been introduced this session. And that is definitely an all-time high. I had to go back in time here the last 5 or so years, and the closest we got to that, actually not necessarily really low, but at 2,970. That was back in the 23 session. We've been as low as around 2,500. In any case, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of layered issues. I think when you start breaking down some of the things that we're covering right now, I mean, we were absolutely seeing layers upon layers of land use bills, housing bills. That seems to be the top element and stuff that's taking place, at least during this session. So we always talk about the importance of that grassroots advocacy. It's as important as it's always been. This isn't really a home stretch yet for us. We have about one more week before we see our first chamber deadline, which effectively means a bill needs to have a work session scheduled between, or effectively by the end of next week. So I was talking with a committee chair who has roughly 130, 140 bills in the committee. They don't have enough physical time to hear every bill in that process, and they're effectively going through it today to try to figure out which ones they are going to try to put into a priority situation so they can at least get it scheduled and move it through the process. So pretty interesting dilemma. I think most of the committees face the same thing, just because of the sheer volume of legislation that's in front of us right now. So with that, Kevin or Patty, if your volume, you want to test your volume back? Maybe?
Can you hear me better now?
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So thanks for that brief update. Sorry, y'all couldn't hear me. We've got 6 specific bills to cover today. For those who are taking notes to see if you want to stay on, we've got House Bill 3556, which is local TLT flexibility. That's transient lodging tax. House Bill 2258, which is the governor's housing bill. Senate Bill 6, which deals with shot clocks for building permits. Senate Bill 974, which deals with shot clocks for multifamily and single family housing developments. Senate Bill 916, we've talked a lot about that this session. This is extending unemployment benefits to striking workers. And Senate Bill 179, which deals with recreational immunity. We're going to start today with Jenna. Jenna is Jenna Jones. She's our LOC lobbyist who handles tax, finance, and all things revenue for the League of Oregon Cities. She's been working hard on securing greater flexibility for transient lodging taxes all session, specifically with her work on House Bill 3556. Jenna, what exactly is it that the members need to know about this bill?
So good and exciting news for today. House Bill 3556 has its first hearing in House Emergency Management, General Gov, and Veterans Committee next week on the 20th. And that's confirmed. So it will likely make it through all of the deadlines, having a public hearing then, and then a subsequent work session the following Tuesday. What I need from all of you is to, if you care about TLT flexibility, please submit written testimony on the record. I know the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association will show up in force to oppose this bill. And so what the bill actually does is it adds a third definition to our restricted portion of TLT funds to include tourism impacted services, which is public safety and community infrastructure. Community infrastructure is your critical infrastructures, water, wastewater, transportation, but also things like parks, trails, and public amenities like public restrooms, public parking lots, and things like access points to tourist destinations like a beach access. So really need people to write letters. And if you have folks on that committee, just email them a copy of your testimony as well. There's a bulletin article in today's bulletin. I just put it in the chat as well as my contact information. And then if this is a high priority for your city and you would like to verbally testify in front of the committee, please reach out to me. I'm trying to get a couple of panels together and coordinate that for the committee chair. I will note that there might not be enough time if this is going to be the packed hearing that I expect it to be. Everyone might not get a chance to testify, but I would like to know who all wants to, and I will try to help as much as possible with talking points. There are also talking points in the bulletin article. So this is the first good step. Our hope is that this bill will pass out of its current committee and go to House Revenue, where we will have more of a conversation and probably some more negotiation. So my last ask is that really push for as much flexibility as possible, whether it be in the community infrastructure space or public safety space, because we want to show that all of this is important to cities, and the more choices we have, the better.
Thanks, Jenna. For some context, what in the written testimony are you hoping that members will actually submit? What types of things would be helpful for you?
I would say if you are a city who is having a hard time funding different infrastructures or public safety and you get a lot of tourists, that would be helpful to know. If you don't particularly need to promote your community and you have a lot of tourism related facility spaces that don't need to be updated. So if you're struggling to spend your 70% that is preempted, let me know. And then also if you're in a place where you just have hotels, but not a lot of tourism and you still see benefit for spending money other places, that would be helpful. Inside the bulletin article, there are talking points if you want to get a little bit more specific on just kind of larger infrastructure numbers for cities or things like that we're seeing around public safety as well.
Thanks, Jenna. And Mayor Wright from Seaside has already volunteered himself to do whatever you need him to do.
Thank you, Mayor Wright.
Okay, so we're going to pivot away from TLT and go to the next thing that we focus on a lot, which is land use and housing. Many of you know Alexandra Ring already. She is the LOC lobbyist who handles all things related to land use, housing, and homelessness. And Alexandra's got 3 bills she needs to talk to you guys about today. The first is House Bill 2258, which is the governor's housing bill. And then there's 2 Senate bills, Senate Bill 6 and Senate Bill 974, both of which deal with shot clocks. Alexandra, I'm going to let you take them in whichever order makes the most sense to you. But what is it that our members need to know about today on these 3 pieces of legislation?
Thank you, Patty. Many of you will be familiar with these bills from last week because they were supposed to be up this Monday and they all magically got shifted to next Monday. So they will be up in Senate and House Housing on Monday at 1 p.m. If you look in the article in the bulletin from this week, I have provided some sample testimony on HB 2258. That is the governor's OR homes concept. This one's kind of a big one in terms of infringement of local control. It creates statewide building plans that live at DCBS that as long as a lot is empty, has no more than a 15% slope and has no kind of hazard overlays, those building plans must be approved without really much local control or oversight. There are a number of concerns there. How do you deal with, how much of a slope you're supposed to have if your community receives more snow, or what if you have a lot of wind? All of those kinds of things are huge concerns. And additionally, kind of design review, things like, when folks think design review, they may think fences or what your siding looks like, but really occasionally, and most of design review is related to, what is the orientation of the garage? Is this a safe, portion of the lot to put it on? Things like that. So it's really of huge concern. There is sample testimony available in the bulletin since a lot of folks asked for it. Please really, personalize it as much as you can to your locality and why this is just a huge kind of problem and concern. So that's HB 2258. If you have not seen it in the bulletin, reach out. I know I have a number of you who asked specifically for the model testimony, and I will send that to you via email as well, just in case. And then SB 974. This is a shot clock bill for kind of zoning and land use and public works. It's got a lot of technical errors in it. I will say the bill sponsors are aware of kind of the level of technical errors, but I think kind of on a larger, more philosophical level, there's a lot of concerns about the infringement of local control, very similar concerns to 2258. It removes kind of design standard review, and creates an entirely new kind of zoning and permitting process for urban housing developments. It's a huge one. Have your permitting folks review, have your permitting folks testimony. We're really trying to get a lot of technical feedback on the record for this one because there are a lot of technical concerns here just outside the philosophical objection to infringement of local control. And then SB 6, which is a really short one and kind of a confusing one. Similarly to 974, it's got some drafting errors. It's got some issues in terms of what the intention of the bill sponsors was and what the bill itself reads as. It is supposed to be a shot clock for building permits, specifically looking at single family and middle housing. So think up to like a 4-plex really. As drafted, that's not really how it reads. We've been in conversations with the bill sponsor about what it would look like to change this to be a more workable bill. There is significant interest in both 974 and SB 6, but it's unclear at this time as to whether or not they will be able to get amendments back in time to move them forward ahead of the deadline. So submit testimony, sign up to testify, tell your legislators how this affects your community.
Couple questions, Alexandra, on the governor's home bill. That's House Bill 2258. What's the support looking like for that in the House?
It's really strong support. I think it's going to be hard to really make any headway on this one. The chair has indicated that she would like to see this move forward more or less as drafted. We know that there are amendments coming out from the governor's office to some of our concerns around giving DLCD oversight of our SDCs. It is their intention to remove that aspect. But kind of the underlying philosophy of the bill remains problematic. We expect to see it move forward, but really trying to to show up and express why it's concerning.
Is there anybody that would be more helpful, any of the state that would be more helpful to raise their concerns, or cities? Who are we trying to target? Anybody?
See here, if Ashland would be great. That's where Representative Marsh, who's the committee chair, is from. So if you're in kind of the Ashland Medford talent area, she really tends to listen to our cities occasionally. Outside of that, the Salem area, Representative Anderson, he's shown a little bit of concern about this city or this bill. He's a former city councilor. He's, very familiar with our processes. Beyond that, I would say those are really the two to target.
Okay. And on the Senate bills, the ones with shot clocks, are we mostly focusing on technical issues now, or are you needing policy concerns as well?
I think double header of both. I think the technical aspects will really show that this is not ready for prime time, that these are bills that are not ready to move forward, that this is, not something we should be handling at this point in session, and really kind of help put the nail in the coffin on these.
Okay, last question. If we have members on the call who want to show up and testify in person on Monday, do you need to know about that in advance?
That would be helpful, but both committees occur at the same time. I cannot duplicate myself. We've already got some members who have volunteered to show up on one bill or another to make the difference, but reach out to me. I'm happy to do more coordination.
Okay, thanks, Alexandra. Let's pivot now to Scott Winkles. Most of you should be familiar with Scott by now. He handles our general government portfolio, which means he handles everything but the kitchen sink. Scott's got two bills today. One we've heard a lot about, Senate Bill 916, which extends unemployment benefits to striking workers, and Senate Bill 179, which deals with the ever important need to restore recreational immunity. Scott, what do our members need to know about?
Thank you very much, Patty. I know we've talked about 916 on this call quite a bit, and I would like to quit talking about it as much as I think you would all like to quit hearing about it, but that is not the way the legislative process works for us. We believe that the bill will be scheduled for a floor vote on the Senate next week. So now is the critical time this weekend. If you've talked to your senators before, you didn't get the satisfactory answer, or you feel like you want to revisit that with them, I think now is the time to escalate those contacts and escalate that language and how you're talking about the bill. I do think we're going to have to lean on members in order to get them into a better place. I will tell you what the bill does. It provides unemployment insurance for striking workers. We believe that bill will make strikes more likely and interrupt public services, especially, and it would pass at a time where we know most of our members are going through some financial hardships with their budgets. They're going to have to make some very difficult decisions. Changing the way we do collective bargaining isn't going to help cities get the clean water to the homes, the dirty water away, put out the fires, answer the police calls, or any of the other critical things that Oregonians rely on their cities to do. And so we know that there are members in the majority caucus who are uncomfortable with this bill. Unfortunately, they have two votes on their desk. They can vote yes or they can vote no. And a yes vote that they're uncomfortable with counts just the same as an emphatic one. So what I think we'd like you to continue to do outreach to your senators. I think at this point, it's safe to say that we'll have to expand our outreach into the House. I think you can remind them that they own their votes. And so if you hear, the caucus needs me or the chair needs, I think, they own those votes. That's what they're elected to do. These are hard decisions. And I think you just need to ask them to prioritize the delivery of public services and meeting the needs of Oregonians over providing unemployment insurance and jeopardizing the health of the unemployment insurance trust fund for employees who've affirmatively chosen to walk off the job. They have a right to do that, but there needs to be risk, and this bill mitigates the risk. So I think one last push in the Senate and that's where we're at.
On that, is there anybody in the Senate that you need to specifically have members contact?
I would say I would talk directly to Senators Patterson, Gelser, Lieber, Reynolds, Woods, Meek, and certainly Senator Golden.
Okay. And can members call you or email you if they need help in terms of in terms of crafting testimony or just communicating concerns?
Yes, they're welcome to reach out. I'll put my work cell in the chat.
One last question on 916. You mentioned that we're probably going to have to pivot and start focusing on the House. Is the time for members to reach out to their House members now, or do they have some time to wait on that one?
Yeah, I think it's great to reach out to the House members now, because if we start pressuring the House members now and they communicate that to their Senate colleagues, they don't want the Senate's not going to want to take a tough vote on a bill that doesn't have a good future in the House. And so I think any legislator focus on the Senate, but I do think you should include the House in those communications.
Thanks. And where are we with rec community?
Well, that's where we have good news, because that bill came off the floor unanimously this week. It only looked easy. But yeah, so that's where we're at. So it's heading over to the House on a very strong vote, and I think we're in pretty good shape. Might be a little more. There might be a few more bumps along the way on the House side, but I'm feeling pretty good about that bill.
Any bumps in particular in the House that we need to be mindful of to try and get out in front of early, Scott?
I don't think we have anything I can predict on the call for mass membership. I think we'll run through the House Judiciary. We'll do our meetings internally and then report back if some people need some bucking up. But like I said, I'm pretty comfortable with that bill right now.
Right. And would it be fair, given how hard we worked behind the scenes and your members did, would it be appropriate for members to thank their senators for their support of this bill?
Everybody likes to, yeah, I think a good thank you along the way. I know, we do these bills. This is the third 3.5 times in my career we've had to revisit this issue, and so we know the courts have been hostile to this concept in the past. So although we don't want to have to repeat this process, we know it's a possibility. So I think a good solid thank you and understand that this is an important issue for us would be great. And it's just polite.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, we're going to move back to Legislative Director Jim McCauley. Jim, I think you've got a reminder on a transportation survey first. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's really first up for me. Just wanted to make sure that folks know that this transportation survey is still out there. I'd like to try to get as many cities to respond by Monday is my goal. So far, we've had a few over 50, so that's been a pretty decent response. And I know not every city has utility fees in place, as an example, to pay for or help leverage transportation investments in their communities. So that's really what we're focused in on, and appreciate everybody participating in it.
And the deadline is Monday?
Deadline is Monday, end of day.
And who will use the survey, Jim, just for some context?
Yeah, so it's a combination of me needing to use the survey information, because we're getting to a point now with the Joint Committee on Transportation as they start to develop some kind of a more detailed framework on what a transportation package could look like. We've still got a long way to go, but one of the issues that has come up there from a couple of the committee members was a better understanding of how many cities out there are not completely reliant on their share of the state highway fund. Effectively, all of that revenue that comes in from gas tax, from license fees, et cetera. So.
Great. And then, Jim, you mentioned at the top of the hour that you and I and several, probably 40, 50 members were in Washington, D.C. this week for meetings with our federal delegation. Do you have anything that you think is worthy of reporting out to the members that they may care about, given what's happening at the federal level right now?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, it was, obviously challenging times. This is a very different administration than we've had in the past. We still had the opportunity to meet with every one of our delegation members. So I found those conversations actually really quite good. I think it's important for folks to understand that they are trying to do everything possible to help with some of the suggested, I'll just say, budget reductions that are taking place, whether it's firings, whether it's programs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of communication going on behind the scenes to, I'll just say, maybe turn back the clock, or maybe make sure that some of those final decision making or some of those final recommendations on reducing the scope of the federal government agencies is being reduced. You know, as an example, you know, this week while we were back there, they decided to rehire the 5,000 wildland firefighters. I think they finally figured out after a month, maybe that's not a great idea to fire those folks since we've got fire season coming up. Well, those types of conversations are taking place virtually all the time. Every day is changing a bit. So I thought that was really, I think, a helpful message. We really focused in on 4 issues back in DC. One was closing the digital divide, infrastructure, the municipal bond issue, as well as SALT, and certainly the FEMA BIOP. And Patty and I had actually a chance to sit down with the White House government affairs staff on that FEMA BIOP, and felt, I think it was a pretty good conversation. No promises on what's going to happen next, but we're going to be following up with some regional government affairs staff that are connected to the White House as well on that subject. And that will hopefully give us a little bit more detail on what some of the next steps that we've got going forward. But overall, there were 1,000 attendees roughly on the Hill that day. So that was a pretty big event across the board for all of the municipal leagues that attended. I think the final piece really on this federal work this week is that there's a lot of town halls, congressional town halls that are going to be taking place here, basically March 16th through the 18th with Senator Wyden and Merkley, as well as Congresswoman Bynum. I know a number of our congressional delegation members have already been doing some here over the last couple of weeks, but the senators are going to be back in district starting over the weekend and extending into next week with a number of open houses and town hall meetings across several counties. And you can find out what those counties are and those locations from our bulletin article today.
Jim, just 2 quick follow-ups.
Yeah.
One on the BIOP. Well, I think you and I assume everybody knows it. Can you briefly describe what it is and what we were able to ask both the White House and our federal delegation to do in regards to the BIOP?
Yeah, so basically, excuse me, what this FEMA BIOP is, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's been going on, I'll just say roughly for a decade. It essentially sets a regulatory structure in place dealing with floodplains and specifically aimed at trying to improve salmon habitat protection. So what was released over the summer from FEMA was essentially pre-implementing an original guideline for how those regulations were going to be put in place. The original timeline was in 2027. They pre-implemented it over the course of the summer and had an expectation for cities to effectively have their choices on how they were going to regulate their floodplain in place by December. So we realize that a lot of cities don't have the resources that are out there. We know that it's pretty unrealistic and unreasonable in many respects to change midstream on what type of a regulatory approach should be taken for, I'll just say, a city's role in salmon habitat recovery. And that's really kind of what we're focused in on, is to turn that clock back to its original time frame. We obviously are pushing for resources out there to make sure that cities have resources to deal with some of these changes. And I think the other part of this piece, if you want to get into some of the details, is we need to start taking a different look and look for something that are, I'll just say, more flexible and more reasonable options for cities as they try to implement some of these guidelines for floodplain protection.
Would it be fair to say that you and I both left those meetings far more hopeful than we did 6 months ago?
Yes, yes. I think we felt good. I don't know if either one of us had the same expectation, but we had a person who was very attentive, who was listening, and I think the mere fact that you had a federal agency implement these guidelines well in advance of completing their environmental impact statement process, which is there's a certain requirement for a time clock when they take input that gives them an opportunity in many respects to maybe change some of their original draft ideas. All of that basically has been thrown out for a pre-implementation roughly 2 years ahead of time.
Okay. And then just because I don't know everybody who is on the call, you mentioned we were there to talk about municipal bonds. Can you tell why we thought municipal bonds needed to be a topic of conversation and where we think we stand with that, at least with our delegation after our meetings?
Yeah, our delegation, I think, holds our perspective 100%. I think everybody that we had a chance to talk to totally understands the importance of not taxing those municipal bonds. We heard from several cities who were back there in DC about what happens if they made a change, if the government decided they wanted to have some more revenue coming in the door or what have you, that it's 10, 15, 20% more expensive to basically get a project out the door if they didn't have the current system that was in place.
Okay, great. Thanks for that quick update. That kind of ends the presentation period from LOC staff. We're welcome to take any questions that you may have on either the meetings that we held in Washington, D.C., the 6 bills that we presented on, or any other issues that concern you. You can either raise your virtual Zoom hand or you can drop a question in the chat. I've seen a couple statements in the chat from members, but I haven't seen any actual questions yet. So what I will do while I give you a few minutes to put that in is just do 2 quick reminders for everybody. That transportation survey Jim mentioned is in fact important. The deadline is Monday. So we really need you to get that done today or Monday if you can, not encouraging anybody to work over the weekend. And the last one is if you are even considering joining the league for its spring conference in North Bend on May 1st and May 2nd, I would encourage you to register probably in the next 10 days. We've blown out historic registration numbers for this particular conference. We are well north of 200, and we do have a cap of 250. So if this is something that you are interested in doing, I would encourage you to register ASAP because we're going to have to shut registration down if the numbers keep going up the way they are. I'm looking at my screen, guys. I'm not seeing any hands up. I'm not seeing any comments that look like a question. Hold on, I got one last minute. Mayor Graham of Ashland. Is LOC organizing elected leaders to call for protecting constitutional structures in the federal government regarding Congress's authority to eliminate agencies and change appropriations, not the executive branch? I know that we're all concerned about immediate firings and funding issues, but there's also a larger question at play in terms of who makes those decisions in the federal government and how it relates to the Constitution. I know there was a lot of concern about how these changes are happening. That's a great question, Mayor Graham. It's one that there was a lot of conversation with, some directly and some indirectly, while we were in Washington, D.C. last week. What I can tell you from the National League of Cities and from some of the meetings we've had is that there is certainly concern. There doesn't seem to be a collaborative, what I would call, effort to be public facing on an issue yet. I think we're seeing what happens with the budget reconciliation process going through the Senate right now. And also, quite frankly, some of the congressmen and women who we spoke with said that right now they're getting a lot of stuff done behind the scenes. And I think some of that is because the public facing stuff has been a little bit quieter. So there's not necessarily a coalition yet, but there are starting to be some murmurs and definitely people who are concerned about it. There was a request for the bill number for rec immunity. Scott, you got the bill number handy?
It's 179. We dropped it in the chat.
Thanks, 179. And then I've got a question from City of Metolius Councilor Christy Abe. I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. Is it too late to submit testimony on Senate Bill 916, Scott?
In the Senate, it is. I think you can certainly share that with your legislators. That would be very helpful. And then I think at this point we can say it's likely you'll have an opportunity in the House.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. I've got a question. I apologize. I don't know where you're from, but the question is about Senate Bill 6 and Senate Bill 974. Alexander, those are your bills. The question is, do these bills actually have legs, and how concerned should we be?
I think it's a tricky one. So they're both bills that have been introduced by Senator Anderson. 976 or 974, at least in some iteration, has been introduced in a couple of previous sessions. There is definitely interest in these topics. I think whether it's these bills moving forward this session or this issue coming back next session or the following session, this is something that we will continue to see, and it's going to continue to gain popularity, likely on both sides. 974 has support of the Senate Majority Leader, so that's of particular concern. I think it's really hard to say just because they're coming in so late and have so many technical issues. We could see them jam through with the technical issues still intact. And that's what we're hoping to avoid with providing a lot of technical feedback about what all is wrong with these bills.
Thanks, Alexander. So this question was answered in the chat already, but for those who don't track it, I want to call it out. There was a question asking if there are any guidance from the league for cities without a tax base to assist with trying to implement a tax. Yes, we have a revenue toolkit, local government revenue toolkit that's been released in the last 30 days. It provides information on various revenue sources that cities are allowed legally at this moment to try and enact and how to do it. Jenna has already put a link that will take you directly to that guidebook that any of you can use. I've got a question from Councillor Schaefer from Corvallis. Is there any update on the status of House Bill 3634, funding for water and wastewater trainings? I'll start with that one. Michael, that should be you.
Yep. Yeah, happy to give an update. So there's been some talk and working with the Water Caucus co-chairs to work through some friendly amendments that wanted to see community college added to that. So we should see that get scheduled, like Jim alluded to, for work session and upcoming deadlines, but we're working through some of those amendments now. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Michael. Also from Councillor Schaefer, any action likely on House Bill 3209, which is a fee for RVs to fund disposal of abandoned vehicles? Not sure whose bill that is, Jim.
That is mine. Help me out again. What was the bill number that they tossed in there?
3209.
3209. So a couple of things. I'll just say the coalition that's put together on that has actually been pretty solid. I am hoping that that's going to get scheduled for a hearing before the end of this week. As of right now, it's not physically in the queue.
Yeah, Jim, it's in transportation, so we have time, but we're having a really hard time. The Republicans that we had sponsoring dropped off because of the tax increase. And so we're working the members, but we are having a hard time.
Yeah, Cindy, thanks for that. Because it's a joint committee, we've got a little bit more time process-wise than what we have for basically these single policy committees that are not joint. They're just regular policy committees. So a little bit more time.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. A quick thank you to Kim from Depot Bay for recognizing how awesome the revenue toolkit is. It's probably one of the things we're most proud of right now. You guys were flurrying in lots of questions and comments. I'm not seeing any right now at the moment. So I will simply say that we appreciate everything that you guys are doing. If you have any questions on specific bills that we didn't discuss today, you can go to the League's website. If you go to our legislative advocacy page, you'll find contact information as well as portfolio information for all of our lobbyists, and you can reach out to them directly. It's Friday afternoon. I hope you're all going to go do something fun over the weekend, and I hope you'll meet us back here next Friday at noon for an update on where things stand with the legislature. Thanks for what you do for your cities and your communities. Have a great evening, everybody.